What's up, LEGO builders? Welcome back to Coconut Brick Studios for episode 2 of building a custom UT-AT in LEGO. This one promises to be a lot more interesting than the last one for one reason and one reason alone. Lots of building. With all the planning and scaling done, I'm free to start work on the exterior panels, and those are very important because, well, that's basically what this tank is, a shell of interconnected panels with an interior. So I need to figure out how exactly I'm going to build those panels and what techniques I need to use to make sure everything gets connected at just the right angle. I'm also going to be building some anti-personnel cannons, so sit back, relax, don't forget to execute order 66 on that like button, and let's get building. Just like a turtle, this thing will look much better with a shell. So I'm going to start building the sides of the main body. The UT-AT might be the curviest of all Republic tanks, with multiple angles on just the sides of the vehicle, and don't even get me started on the front. So what I'm going to try to do is build separate panels and connect them together via hinges to get the right angles. This episode is really going to highlight how messy of a builder I am, meaning I tend to just put plates, hinges, and bricks wherever they need to go without caring how the insides of my builds look. With most of my mocks, this doesn't matter because I can cover up the insides of buildings, mountains, or whatever it is I'm working on, but this is a vehicle. Its interior is a big part of the build and could be on display, so I gotta clean up how I build and make sure to be more intentional with where I place stuff to make the inside look more realistic and cleaner. Also, that'll allow me to include things like seats and weapons racks. These are the hinge plates I'll be using. I have the largest panel connecting in first with the smaller panel. At an angle up above it. Another issue with vehicle building is the precision that's required. I accidentally made the pillars holding up the second panel one plate too tall on this side of the tank, and you can see that caused the gap between the panels to be much larger than it should have been. Even being off by one little plate can really mess you up. Whereas with terrain work, small variations and imperfections like that actually work in your favor because it makes the terrain look more realistic and less like it was man-made. Now you guys are starting to see why I stick with terrain builds. Problems aside, I'm really liking how these panels fit together. I was able to get the right angles and everything fits together very snugly. That was one of the main things I was concerned with this build. Because it has so many angles, that means lots of separate panels fitted together, and more panels tends to mean more gaps. I'm sure you've all built a LEGO set, especially a Star Wars one, and been annoyed with how big the gaps between the panels can be, so to see this level of cuddling between mine makes me happy. That being said, this is the easiest section to do. The whole side of the vehicle is flat. Moving up to the front, I'll have panels going in all different directions, which will be a much bigger challenge. But I wanted to start with this easy section first, since it takes up most of the body, and it helped me figure out a good system for making and connecting panels together. The sides of the tank ended up being just tall enough for minifigs to sit in the seats, which is good, but when standing they basically touch the roof. However, I can always make the walls a bit taller later, and I think just one more plate would be enough. Now the next step is to rebuild the panels but smoother. I have tons of studs on the sides, and this isn't a LEGO set, so that's not gonna fly. But before I do that, I need to reinforce the bottom. I only have 2 repulsors down there, and the weight and size of the tank is starting to make the frame bend and rip. But before I get into that, I have an interesting haul. A bit of a backstory. When building a mock, you kind of have an idea of what parts you'll need based on what the build is. Terrain mock, plates and slopes. City, bricks, tile, and plate. Vehicles, however, tend to require rare, hard-to-find parts since you're building more complex things like engines, wheels, shocks, and other things of a mechanical nature. So going into this mock, I was anticipating needing some weird, hard-to-find parts, especially given how strange the UT-AT is, but they were not the parts I expected. First, this 3-hole Technic plate. A pretty simple-looking piece, but almost impossible to find in the quantities I needed. The second one is this 1x9 black Technic bar. Once again, super generic piece. I thought they would be an ample supply, but only came across one store that had what I needed. Thankfully, I was able to find a decent amount of both, but another thing I have noticed is that I have been getting a lot of off-colored pieces lately. You all saw the state of some of those white parts in the last update, and 2 separate Bricklink orders this last week gave me off-colored light bluish gray parts. And no, they weren't even old light gray, they just look like they've been in the sun too long or something. For how cool they look, the Repolsers are pretty easy to build, and I really like the way they look. I normally don't like combining Technic with regular brick and plate, as it's hard for me to transition from one together in a way that looks good, but the smooth machined look these pieces give the Repolsers is perfect, and it highlights the difference between the tank and the way it propels itself. Although it does kind of make me think of Santa's sleigh when I see the ski looking things underneath my tank. I'm gonna build half of them now and save the rest for later. Let me know in the comments if you prefer hover tanks or walkers. To strengthen the base, I'm going to run a row of black brick across the middle and then place a bunch of 2x3 slopes fanning out from the middle to support it widthwise. And just doing these two things already made the frame stronger, and I think when I add tile to the interior, that will connect all the plate in the frame from the top as well, and we will be golden and have a nice strong base. But here's where I ran into a potential big problem. I noticed one of the sides of the frame had a seam between plates that was really weak and causing it to bend and break. Luckily, this side is 10 studs long, and I have a bunch of 10 by plates, so I decided to rip up pretty much all the progress I've made so far to add in that longer plate and get rid of the seam. I could have left it alone and saved a little bit of time this week, but I'd be dealing with that problem for the entire rest of the series, and it could cause much bigger problems down the line if that weak side is unable to hold up the weight of the tank panels, and fixing it 3 weeks from now would be an even bigger hassle since more of the tank would be built and need to be ripped up. Pay the price today to live the life you want tomorrow, as Eric Thomas would say. We are good to go and the repulsors are going in. I've drooled over these enough, so I'll hold my tongue, but I wonder why more Republic vehicles didn't use this kind of technology. I love walkers. The AT-TE is my favorite vehicle in Star Wars, but I always felt like legs were a pretty inefficient propulsion method, especially because this tank as well can lock into the ground via energy shields to stabilize itself regardless of what kind of terrain is underneath it. Basically unlimited stability. I said earlier I wanted the panels to be smoother, so I'm going to rebuild them but with tile instead of plate. Why not just tile off the existing panel, you might ask? Because that would make them super thick and cause the gaps between the panel to be more pronounced since each panel would be taller. I'm leaving some studs in because I do like the tile and stud look. It adds texture to the build, and at the end of the day it is still a Lego mock and I want to keep that nostalgic look the studs provide. Plus I want to be able to connect little plates, tiles, and other greebling bits to add color and detail to the sides. The secondary panels were the toughest to convert because there's a lot of small plate on the underside, so getting all those to connect together as well as adding the dark bluish gray markings was tough, but I soldiered on and the end result was very rewarding. I also saw that there are these red storage container looking things on the tank, so I built a couple and added a yellow plate to match the other yellow markings of this tank. This tank is a lot more colorful than I first realized, which is good. Star Wars vehicles tend to be a little bland. You can see the difference just taking away the studs makes. It's the exact same design, but boy did we level up in the looks department. I think the panels still fit together pretty snugly and the extra repulsors allow the build to stand on its own. Looking at this makes me want to sit down and just finish the whole thing right now. I gotta remember, slow and steady wins the race. There's still a lot of complicated things to design, and I want to take my time and make sure every part of the tank looks this good. On the rear of the tank are 4 anti-personnel cannons. I decided to design a couple of prototypes just to get a feel for what they could look like. There aren't really any distinct features besides the barrel and the red top, so I just went with something that looks cool. I'm building 2 variations of this turret, one with a fixed gun barrel and one with a hinge that will allow the barrel to move up and down. This one is a lot more clunky and unfinished looking, but I do like the play feature. Both cannons are in and I'm torn. I feel like the fixed barreled cannon looks much cleaner and more complete, but from a practical standpoint, I prefer the other one. I just don't like the way the barrel and hinge connect. It just looks bad. But it also bothers me having cannons on a tank that can't move up or down, especially with how high off the ground they sit. That really limits what the cannons can shoot at. Let me know in the comments which option you prefer and why. This series is still young, so I do have time to redesign, and hopefully I will figure out a way to combine what I like about both options into one build. At the end of the last episode, I was kind of frustrated and wanted to keep building because I felt like so little got done and there were still so many question marks surrounding the build and what it was going to look like, but the fruits of this week have me feeling much more satisfied. It's so much easier to see what the tank's going to look like, and so far everything has scaled together perfectly. But next episode, whoo baby, I'm taking the plunge and starting that mess of angles that is the front cockpit area. It's been hanging over my head really since the beginning and I want to get it started. I'm also going to do more interior work as I want to add gunner stations for the anti-personnel cannons. But that wraps up this episode. Don't forget to let me know what you thought about everything down below in the comments, and I will catch you next time. But until then, happy building.